Welcome. My name is Joel Neubeck. I'm Director of Technology for Terralever, and I'm going to be presenting on creating a great experience on Digg with Windows Internet Explorer 8. And I'm going to spend some time kind of talking a little bit about the features that are in IE8, specifically web slices, accelerators, and visual search suggestions. Talk about them in context of some work that we did for Digg, but also talk to you in context of their use in interactive marketing and their use in general web development. So for the next hour plus or so, we're gonna go over that entire experience. We're gonna focus a lot on the designer-developer workflow and how that ties into using these features, but more importantly, how we as developers / designers can leverage the power that these features bring to help improve the experience that our users have. I'm going to talk a little bit about how you'll get started using these tools, how to look at what type of clients might make sense, kind of look at which one of these features or how these features can be deployed, how these features can be adopted by the communities around the sites and the clients that you work with. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how you might apply these principles that we used within designing the things for Digg, but how you apply them to your other clients. And then lastly, I'm going to demo a web slice that we built. That web slice was built for one of our clients, and it's built in the new 3.0 beta bits that were just released yesterday. So who we are. As I said, I'm Director of Technology. I've been with Terralever for about 3 years. I'm also a Silverlight MVP and a member of some of the early adoption teams with Silverlight. So I have a really strong involvement in the Silverlight community, and that's a great addition or a great component of these features that we can use in IE8. Terralever, we're an interactive marketing agency, so the work that we do tends to be very focused on driving results for our clients. So it's how do we as an organization look to various different channels, IE8, the use of Flash, the use of Silverlight, RIA, WPF, different technologies. How do we do that to reach a new set of users or to build more community around the sites or those properties? And lastly, we're just very committed. So we're committed to using a lot of innovation. We're also very, very committed to how we execute on the work that we do. So some of the stuff that we work on, we do a lot of work for Red Bull in the space of interactive marketing. That uses a lot of powerful, rich interactive technology. We also do a lot of work with Flash and Flex, and now quite a bit with Silverlight. Last year, we were here and we presented a session on our use of Silverlight in casual gaming. And you may or may not have heard of these games. These 3 games are things that we've worked on over the last year and a half or so. The first game that we ever created was arguably the first casual game ever created in Silverlight, was Zero Gravity. And it's a pretty fun little interactive game. That led us to doing some other Silverlight ventures in that space. All of them were intended to help drive users to various properties. So it was how do you build a better user experience for these specific properties, get users to interact, and do it in an enjoyable way. So Zero Gravity was done in Silverlight 2. Zombomatic, which is kind of the middle one, was done in Silverlight 1. And then the last one was Tunnel Trouble, which we released at MIX last year against the 2.0 beta versions. So today, everybody heard about the release of IE8, the full non-beta version release of IE8, and there's 3 big components that we're going to talk about today. You may or may not have been exposed to them. My guess is you're familiar with their terminology. You may have not actually played with them yet, so I'm going to show you how these different features function. I'm going to give you a little bit of glimpse at some of the things that exist out there today that fall into these 3 spaces. Visual search. Visual search is a component or a piece of code that you can write as a developer that allows for some suggestive search directly within IE. The web slice is something that allows you to present a snippet of content from your site or your application and present it in a way that it gets included on the favorites bar of IE8. And accelerators allow you to have some click sensitivity around content. So I can go into a piece of text on a web page, I can right-click on that, and I can expose an accelerator that may interact with that piece of content. So visual search. Visual search is, I think, one of the neatest additions to a piece of IE that we've become very accustomed to, and that's that built-in search bar that exists. What really differentiates this from traditional type-ahead searches is the visualization of images. So having the ability to customize how you would like your property or how you would like your data searched, but customize it in a way that you can actually present images and present more visual content to drive those users, one, to filter down to a smaller set of data, but two, to actually drive from this list of content into your actual property. The entire premise behind visual search is based on the XML open search specification. So in essence, by building or using these components, other browsers can certainly implement this same type of specification and allow this technology to be then used within those browsers as well. And then obviously the results, having the ability to format images. So how do they work? They're really a relatively simple premise. I, as a property, have the ability to create content. So I'm going to create some content. I may store it in some relational database. Don't really care what that relational database is. I then am going to create some services, some web service, some service-oriented architecture that allows me to present that data out of whatever that data store might be. Now, typically, I might present that data for an RSS feed, or I may present that data for consumption by other applications. The only differentiation between using that service for whatever other application needs you have and using it within visual search is how that data is formatted. So what you see here on the left is literally just a reformatting of a service that exists. So in this example, I'm showing a service from Amazon.com. So Amazon.com has all of these products. I started typing in my IE search window, filtered down to a set of content, and they in turn massaged that data and returned an XML feed, that XML feed being formatted as you see up here. IE8 will do all of the formatting of that content. So you're not responsible for having to massage that XML feed in any way. It will just simply be presented as you see here on the right. So when I'm interacting on a website like Amazon.com or any website, I can be on a web page, I can go up to my little search bar up in the upper right-hand corner, and I can select a provider. So if you look down kind of at that window towards the bottom right-hand section, you'll see a series of providers that I've added. Those providers allow me to change what I search or what I type within that window to redirect that search to be performed against a service that one of these providers has created. In this situation, using Amazon.com, I'm going to search the entire database of products to filter myself down to a subset that is appropriate. I can then click on one of those products and drive into actual details. I want to show you real quick kind of how that works. Just if you haven't played around a bit with it, I think it's a pretty cool feature. So here I'm on some web page. I go into my search bar, and like I said, I've got some different search providers in here. So I have one for Amazon. I've defined one to be my default. I'm going to click on Amazon, and I'm going to start the typing of some results. IE8 is going to make some suggestions on what they perceive the results of how I type should be. But interjected below that first set of results is the results being returned from that visual search service that exists within Amazon.com. So they've made a decision as to how to present that content. They may have made a decision about how to prioritize or how to order that content. But more importantly, it's presented in a visual way that I can very easily go in here, I can click on this watch, and I will now be directed to Amazon where I can actually look at that specific product. So I think from an interactive marketing perspective, you're going to have a lot of ability to go out to your community and to drive them into the products that exist in your site without necessarily having to first get them to come to your property. I don't necessarily think that visual search is for every provider of content, but certainly for those organizations that have community or those organizations that have a lot of content that is typically accessed via search, I think it's going to be a great tool. There's various other search providers. You can go and you can find various different search providers on the IE8 gallery page. So I can actually go in, I can do, let me see if I can. Let's see. Well, we'll go to gallery in a bit. So let me go back here to my deck. The second thing I want to talk a little bit about is web slices. Web slices is another component that, it's kind of another tool in our arsenal that developers have and that organizations have for giving content providers or websites the ability to outline or pick a specific section of content that they feel is relevant, content that users may want to be updated on, or content that users may be interested in subscribing to, and you can tag or I guess present that content directly out of your favorites bar. So I, as a developer, can create a web slice. That web slice can be embedded or tagged within a page. The user then can click on some piece within that page, and they can add that web slice to their toolbar. Couple things to note. When a web slice is developed, you define what that expiration or that time to live parameter is. And so two things can happen. If you define an expiration, you could actually put time-sensitive information in there. So maybe it's auction data, or maybe it's an event. You can actually say that content's going to expire after a certain period of time. That tells IE then not to go and look at that data to see if data has changed. The second part of it is you can define how long that data can live within the context of your experience before IE should go and look for a change in the content. So I may define that my TTL is 15 minutes. And what that's going to tell IE to do is to actually go back to my property, to look at wherever that content is, and to update that web slice with the latest content. Once that has been updated, up in the top menu bar, you'll actually see it go bold. So to the user, you now have been given a clear indication as to content that has changed. You've been given an indication as to when something might be more relevant that you need to look at, or maybe a new product has been released, or something that should draw you into looking at that property. Oops, wrong one, sorry. So how do they work? Web slices are once again a relatively simple concept, and there's various different ways in which you can implement a web slice. The easiest and probably the littlest amount of development effort would be to simply consume some feed of data. So in this example, I have a web slice that's simply consuming an XML feed or an RSS feed of content. So I define a little bit of HTML that exists on my page. This HTML is going to specify where on the page I'd like to indicate or highlight that this web slice exists. It's going to tell IE that a web slice is somewhere on that page, which is another way that you can discover it. And then it's also going to define how it will be presented in your toolbar. So I define an entry title. That entry title is what's going to be presented up in the toolbar. I define a link or a source, and we'll talk a little bit about this when we get into how we actually implemented one for Digg. There are various ways in which you reference content and how that content then gets consumed. In this situation, it's simply consuming content and presenting it automatically in IE. It is not requiring you to write any code that exists on your server that actually presents the data in a visual way. You simply have to provide the data to IE. IE will format it and present it within that web slice. Sorry, I keep hitting the wrong button. Let's go, just real quick, we'll go to IE and we'll take a look at a web slice. So one of the web slices that Digg currently has on their site is a top and all topics web slice. This web slice was the first web slice that they had created, and this web slice consumes that feed of XML. So I've subscribed to that web slice. That web slice is presented here in this window, and it's presented in more or less an RSS feed presentation with little control over how it's visualized, little control over how the content gets positioned and organized. It's certainly a custom view of this content because we're seeing pieces of property that may not traditionally be presented in this fashion within a normal RSS feed. There's a couple other web slices that exist out there. You can go to the IE8 gallery. I'll show you where that is. And there's a whole handful of web slices that have already been developed. This one was done for the Microsoft innovation team by some developers. And it's an interesting one. What it does is it allows you to type in some term like my name, and I can do a search. And in this situation, I'm using a rich interactive web slice. So this web slice is actually done in Silverlight 2. It goes and it aggregates against live services to pull some content. It extracts out some images. Those images then get presented. And then I obviously don't have a lot of images. And I can click on one of these images, and I can look at what that image looks like. This image is actually from a blog post I did a long time ago in regards to I had created a deep zoom example that had a fighter plane inside of there. So it scrubs all that content, presents that content in a very unique way, a way that a user may not traditionally experience in a normal website. So the last IE8 feature that I want to talk about is the accelerator. The accelerator, I think, is one of the most powerful IE8 features that we as developers can leverage for really improving the user experience of interacting with content on a site. The reason I say that is because traditionally when we want to take a piece of content that we find somewhere on the internet and we want to look that up on a map, or we want to translate that word from English to French, or we want to translate maybe we want to look it up in Wikipedia or look it up in some other place, we would take that content, we'd copy it, we may paste it, we may do something of that type of workflow. The use of an accelerator allows you to select a piece of content and push that content directly to a piece of code that we've written. In this case, this is one that Microsoft wrote around Virtual Earth, and allows you to provide that content-sensitive result directly without leaving that page. So in this example, I selected our work address, right-clicked on that address, and I actually was able to pull up a map. So let me show you what that looks like in a real world here. Let's just do the same type of an example. I'll go into my Contact Us form. I'll go down here, I'll select the text from my address. Now, once I've made that selection of text, notice how I've got a little icon here. This icon tells me that I have an accelerator that's going to allow me to look up or to find some information in regards to that. If I right-click on that, I can go in here and I can say Map with Live Search, and instantly it's taken that content I've selected, it's pushed it to Live Search. Live Search has then mapped that on the physical map and presented it in a very visual way. Now, one thing to note, an accelerator doesn't necessarily have to present a visual display preview. it could very easily just take content you've selected and pass it through. And I'll show you an example of that a little bit later, where that content could actually be pushed directly into submitting a story, or maybe that content needs to go into a larger visualization that's going to fit within this accelerator window. So how do they work? An accelerator is extremely easy to add to a page. You simply make a JavaScript call. That JavaScript call references a manifest or an XML document that you create. That XML document gives it the entire instruction necessary for how to present that accelerator. So in this situation, I may have on my website an accelerator I want to call out. I may do a call to action somewhere on my page. I may make that a button that calls this JavaScript, and then users, by interacting with that, would instantly add that accelerator. Once an accelerator is added, I can go in there and I can do things like organize how it's going to be displayed, define its priority or its order in relationship to other accelerators. Now, within that XML manifest, there are a few things to note in what gets presented. Once again, this is an open service description file, so it's a very standardized XML document. And I can reference a few different things in here which allow for the accelerator to be presented in a very specific way when you right-click on that content. The first is I obviously give it a name. That's the name that's going to be displayed. I can give it an icon. That icon allows it to be presented within the list of accelerators with some form of favorite icon. The last part is I can give it a category. There are various different categories which have been predefined. You're certainly open to create additional categories if appropriate, but a few of them are like add. Add is a category that suggests that I'm selecting content and I'm adding it to another site, or I'm publishing it to another site. I believe some of the other ones might be, there's one for description, I think, or definition. Definition would be like if I've got a translator, or I want to look it up on Wikipedia or something of that set. The second part of this, or the second part of this activity node, is pointing to the action that gets executed when I'm actually loading up the accelerator. Now, a couple things need to happen. One, when we load up the accelerator, we need to pull some content out of the page. So we've got a series of different named elements that we can access. In this example, I'm pulling up document title and document URL. Both of those can be actually passed to the accelerator, so the accelerator may look it up within a database, may do some things with it, and then upon executing with the accelerator, let's say, for example, there's a submit button or something that needs to be actually pushed to an external source, I can then define what elements I want to push, how those elements are named, and the location or the target of where I'll be pushing that content to. All right, so what do we do for Digg? Digg came to Terralever a while back and said, okay, we see IE8 has these new features. What could we do within our content that we have? How could we leverage specifically web slices, and how could we leverage accelerators to improve the experience a user has, one, in IE8, but more importantly, drive users to the Digg website? And in two forms. One, obviously, to drive users to look at content within Digg. But secondly, Digg's about submission of stories, right? It's about getting stories in there that creates community. Within that site, users then interact with that stories. They create comments, they talk. So we knew that there were two very specific goals that we wanted to be able to execute on. And in the example of the accelerator, our number one priority was to get submissions of stories. So hands down, we wanted to make it very easy that a user could be on a web page and they could pass that data directly to Digg. Once that data is in Digg, then it's Digg's submission story process that kicks in. But another aspect of it was, how could we actually entice them to do that? So you know, one option that we had available to us was to build an accelerator that had no display preview. We could have very easily been on a page, not selected any text, right-clicked on it, selected the Digg accelerator, and transported them directly to the Digg website. By doing that, we would have had all of the necessary information to expedite that process of submission. We would have had the document title, which is necessary. We may have had some content off the document. We may have had the server or the site or the location in which the content was. We could have very easily done that. But the second aspect or the second goal of the project was to actually show them content that might be relevant to where they are. So the first part of that was, well, let's look to see if this story is already submitted. Because very often, you find something of interest, and you want to submit that to Digg, but you haven't actually went to Digg yet to see if that content exists. So the second part of this was, well, let's go and see if that content is already on that server. If that content's on the server, then let's provide a completely different user experience. If that content's not on their server, then let's provide an experience that suggests or helps them to submit that story. So let me show you the Digg accelerator that we generated. And then we'll kind of, once I show it, then we'll break down the actual development life cycle of how it's built and how it's constructed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a web page. Let's go to my favorites. Let's go to something in PC World. Obviously very relevant since that was today. Now, probably a slightly bad example in here because they're already indicating that it's on Digg. But let's just say, hypothetically, we didn't know that this story had already been put on Digg. So we read the story. We were very interested in it. So what I do is I simply right-click on my page, anywhere on this page. I go up to my accelerators, and I select the Digg accelerator. Once I've selected the Digg accelerator, I'm telling IE now to do two things. First, send me information from this page. Send me the location that I'm at, and send me some metadata. From that, we're able to then customize the content that comes back. And in this situation, this story happens to already be submitted, so we can actually present this story on or within the IE8 accelerator display preview window. So instantly a user knows, great, the story's already been submitted. So they can navigate over here. This can be fully interactive. This entire web slice is basic HTML. I'm going to refer to it as more static content. It's not rich in interaction, but it's well formatted HTML that has links that bind into the specific article or content. So I can very easily click on that. I can look at it in the context of Digg, and then I can go through the traditional Digg process to dig the story, maybe log in. If I'm not a user of Digg, I might create a user account, and then I can also look at additional pieces of content. Now, we made a decision, obviously, to open a new tab. When navigating through that process, we can actually tell it how to target. Are we going to target additional content within that display window, or are we going to target the window in which we're on? In this situation, we made a conscious decision to create a second tab that allowed them to stay where they were, but also look at it in the context of Digg. Now, another thing that we did within this web slice, or within this accelerator, was to say, okay, this is already dug, but let's show them some other content that is relevant, but relevant to the location in which we're at. So instead of a user now having to go, okay, I see this story's been submitted, but what other stories may have been submitted from PC World? So very, very quickly, we can show them, right within this preview window, a few other articles that may be of interest, and then they can certainly drill in or dive in to that content. Now, in this current version, we do not have the capability of actually digging the story within the accelerator, but certainly with the right type of an authentication model, we could very easily allow a user to authenticate with Digg and then allow them to actually dig stories within this window. Now, as a business, as an organization like Digg, my goal is to provide content to my user, but it's also to drive users to my website. So in this situation, there's a conscious decision to actually try to get them to come into the Digg website and to actually look at additional content. So we're only going to show them a really small preview. We're not going to allow them to do things like look at what those comments are or look at different information, but we're going to encourage them to go in and to interact with that content on the website. So let's break down how this thing works. So as I had said, we look to see if the story's already been submitted. So behind the scenes, in this situation, this accelerator is written entirely in PHP. Digg is a PHP site, so we were able to build the accelerator to take that data from IE, run it through whatever services might exist within Digg, massage that data, and then present that data returned back from the PHP server in this display preview. So as I had already indicated, we show them the 3 next most popular stories. We also display the most recent story from that site. Now in this example, if I had been to a site where it hadn't been submitted, you'll see that we'll show them different content. We'll target that content to be very, very specific. So if I go to a page and that page hasn't already been submitted, well, one of our first project goals was to get them to submit that. So in a pretty brute force way, we're saying, okay, this story hasn't been submitted, submit the page to Digg. Clicking on that button will actually go into the submission process. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second. In this example, we're going to just pull some recently popular stories. We made a decision not to show stories from that site in anticipation that it was possible that being on a page that hadn't been submitted, it may be likely that there are not additional stories that have been submitted. So let's not present them with nothing. Let's present them with some content that's actually maybe relevant to encouraging them to go to the Digg website. So let me go back and show you quick what that process would look like if I go to a page that hasn't been dug. So let's go to my home page. I'm pretty sure our home page hasn't been dug. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to our accelerator. I'm going to go to Digg Accelerator. And you're going to see that in this situation, this story hasn't been dug. So I'm presented with that content. I can click on the submit page to Digg, and it's going to allow me to go through that process. If I'm a new user, I would go through that whole process of doing registration. Once I've completed that, I will then go into the submission process. If I already have an account, I can simply log in. Once I log in, the key pieces of information necessary that we were able to pull from that page will be pre-populated on the forms for you. In this case, title and the URL of which it came from. And then they, as a user, can enter whatever additional data or copy that they want and submit that directly through the site. So earlier when I was showing you that XML manifest, I was talking about there's different pieces of information that we have access to. So these are the very, I guess there's what, 8 different pieces of information that are provided to the accelerator developer that we can access. In our example, we chose to take document title and document URL. Now, as we had shown before, you may be selecting content like we did in the address. So in that situation, I would choose to access the property selection. There are various different, very content-sensitive things that you could do depending on what you select. So for example, if I'm selecting a link, there may be very specific accelerators that need to be presented, or there may be very specific logic. So in those examples, I could actually go after different pieces of information that have been stored on that link. And for example, if I'm actually a provider of content, I may choose to format all of my links on my web page with a specific attribute, and that attribute then could actually improve the experience of using an accelerator from that same site to improve how the user would interact on that specific location. So like an example might be maybe to expedite the looking up of an address for content that doesn't necessarily present an address in its results. maybe I put within my rel attribute a latitude and a longitude, and by simply right-clicking on that link, I open up an accelerator. That accelerator actually uses that to geocode a location and shows me that without actually having to show the user an address or show a user a piece of information. So this is a pretty small set, and there's probably things that over time we'll find that are necessary other than these pieces of information. But you can provide quite a bit of text or quite a bit of functionality accessing these specific pieces of information. Digg Visual Search. Now I want to preface this part by saying that Digg Visual Search, I'm going to talk about that in the context of a proof of concept. This is not something that is actually implemented on the Digg website yet. But we did as an example to show how you could actually do that, how you could do it in an extremely fast amount of time, a few hours, by simply consuming content that you already have within your property. So I'll just preface what you're going to, I just got done saying they're a PHP site, so you're going to see some stuff that suggests WCF 3.5, which is obviously contradictory to how Digg would present that data. If this were to go into production for Digg, I would anticipate that would be repurposed and done differently within their structure of how they'd like to present data out of their service-oriented architecture that they have for their Digg API. So the very first thing that I need to do to build a visual search is to present some content. And I had already showed you what this XML looked like. This XML, really the key pieces of information that need to be presented. Oh, I haven't shown you this XML. My apologies. This XML is the service, the content that's returned from Digg. So as a person looking to build a visual search component, I likely have some service-oriented architecture that already exists on my server. In the case of Digg, Digg has a whole depth and a whole series of APIs that are accessible to a user. So in this example, I've specifically asked for a piece of content. I've asked for some stories. They may have been top stories. I've formatted a URL to go to the Digg services to pull that information. And what gets returned to me is their format of how a story gets presented. So it's an XML format. That XML format has some specific nodes that are relevant to how Digg typically, or how application developers typically consume Digg content. One thing to note, visual search does not have to be based on consuming just XML. Visual search could consume JSON if you would like. And for example, in our web slice, in our accelerator, we actually consume JSON and not XML because we felt that the amount of data we would receive, it would actually be a smaller footprint, a smaller experience by doing that. So once I've got that content, then what I need to do is I need to massage it or reformat it. So I'm going to take and I'm going to build that XML format that I showed you before by simply taking some XML over here and massaging it. Now, in the case of Digg, if this were to go into production within the Digg website, my guess is that massage would occur within the Digg environment, and it wouldn't be done by a third party. But let's say that I, as an application developer, would like to consume sources of data like this from multiple locations. So if I were going to do that, then I would need a step that took that data, and it may be 3 sources in completely different formats, and remassage them into a specific piece of information. When it gets presented, that data gets presented in that XML format. A couple things to note in there. The query, when a user types in that information into that search bar at the top of IE8, that information got sent to the server. It got then returned back with me in my XML that gets returned to IE8. That allows IE8 to display what's being typed, but it also allows for the content to be tied to whatever term they may have entered. The reason I bring that up is because there are some areas where caching might be able to be done more effectively by actually caching data as it's being returned from your server. So once I've consumed a third party or an external source, I may choose to cache that data. I may choose to cache all the data, or I may actually choose to cache data in the context of the queries in which users are interacting with. So I can make some decisions. So let me show you, again, this visual search. And I just want to talk a little bit about how the data gets presented. So up here in IE8, I go up to my search bar, and you can see that I have a Digg icon. So when I defined my XML manifest, and that XML manifest allowed me to add the search provider to IE8, I specified what that icon was. Once I click on that icon or that favorite icon, I'm now targeting my selective search just to Digg. So if I start typing in something, like in this case I started with the letter M, you'll see that the results here are being presented, and they all contain the letter M. Now, as a developer, I'm going to certainly apply some better logic to how I may choose to match a string with the content that's being presented. In this case, we just do a restrictive query. Like I said, this is all done in WCF3, so we use link to massage the XML. So the XML comes back. We use link to massage it and apply a where clause. So it's a relatively simple way of doing the data. But I can keep going down, and I can keep typing. And as I type, my selective search is going to narrow down to a specific piece of information. I always want to be careful what I click on here. So in this situation, I typed in Michael. I got an article in regards to Michael Jordan's son. Pretty cool. Couple things that I think are really, really important to keep in the back of your head with visual search. It's going to be under a tremendous amount of load. So if users are typing character by character and they're getting results back, a lot of caution has to go into how you are on the server consuming data and how you're caching it or massaging that data. In the case of Digg, Digg has in place a persistent cache already. So every 15 minutes, the data within Digg is cached and becomes, at some point, stale and gets replaced. So we can apply two levels of caching. One, we can use that cache to ensure that we're not putting tremendous load on Digg. But then if I'm a provider aggregating content, I'm going to likely provide my own level of caching, which caches what I've pulled from the Digg environment. Obviously, hitting my environment repeatedly is going to mean that there needs to be a relatively scalable solution in place. So if I were in Amazon.com and I'm providing a visual search, I believe a lot of attention needs to be paid towards how well that's going to perform and how much data I'm going to present. Now, in my example, I chose to present very, very basic information. So I decided to provide the image as it existed in the Digg article, the title, the number of digs, and the number of comments. I think when building a visual search component, let's not try to regurgitate all the information that the user can get by driving to that website. Let's present information that makes them interested in clicking on that article to find more information. So in the case of Amazon, I get pricing information. Pricing information is extremely relevant in search because it's going to help me to make that decision, do I actually drive in to that location and find more content. In the case of Digg, nothing's more relevant than the amount of interaction the community has with that content. So I believe comments are extremely important in this situation because that's where that community is. I don't care as much about looking at a piece of content that's been dug a lot as much as I do knowing that a lot of people have commented on it and that there's some community around that specific piece of content. So web slice. So the second component, or the third component, but the second component that we built for Digg was a web slice. And in this example, we wanted a couple very specific goals we wanted to keep at the top of our head. First was we didn't want Digg to have to write anything. We did not want Digg to have to change their services. We didn't want Digg to have to create any additions to their API. We simply wanted them to provide no additional server code to be able to provide this functionality to a user. We wanted to consume content, and so we wanted to leverage how they already provide that data. And like I said, they provide it in two formats, in JSON and in XML, so it was very easy for us to make a decision as to how we would consume it. Other two parts of that is we wanted to provide data in that web slice under two specific topics. We felt strongly that the top in all topics was a very relevant piece of information that users want out of Digg. And the second part was what has recently been dug. We wanted to show content that changed frequently. So as users interact with the web slice, we wanted to show them content that was most frequently changing. The second big piece that we wanted was we wanted to provide an enhanced view. Now, we made a decision that in the accelerator to use HTML and use a more static version of how that display preview would be presented. In the web slice, we wanted to take a little bit more liberty in how we did that. And the way in which we wanted to do that was to incorporate Silverlight into the user's experience. So now, obviously, not all users have Silverlight yet, so we wanted to present an experience for those users that don't have Silverlight. But for those that already had Silverlight too, we wanted to provide a more enhanced experience. So using Silverlight, using RIA, a big goal of the project. The third piece was we wanted to do it fast. We wanted from the time we started talking about it to the time it deployed on the server, we wanted that to be less than 2 weeks of time. And that involves a lot of things in the sense of design approval, iteration on design, prototyping, maybe some proofing around whatever motions go into that, testing, development, and deployment. So 2 weeks, relatively aggressive time. We built the web slice with a developer and a designer. So it wasn't a tremendously large staff, but to do it in 2 weeks, I think, is a pretty good undertaking. I think that talks to the ease of creating the web slice. It also talks to how easy it is to actually use Silverlight and to develop against Silverlight to present and consume content. So I want to show you what that Digg web slice looks like. So for the purpose of saving time, I'm going to go up here to the web slice. So I've added the web slice already to my page. I'm going to click on that web slice, and I'm going to present that. So in this example, I'm actually showing you a Silverlight web slice. It's a little hard to see on that screen the way that it's being presented, but to the right is a custom scroll navigation bar that we created, and then to the left is a series of articles or content. As I interact with this web slice, I can actually look at specific informations, leveraging the power and the techniques or the technology of Silverlight, more importantly, using more rich interaction to show users a lot more content in a much smaller window. So we knew that we wanted that web slice to only be about 320 pixels. That's about the recommended size for a web slice. But we also knew that we wanted to show, and initially we hoped to show 45 stories. We decided on 30. Well, 30 pieces of content is a great amount of information to be able to present in here, but possessed an interesting design challenge because we did not want a scroll bar, and we did not want a person to be forced to increase the size or change the size of the web slice. So the way that we did that was to create our own custom slider. So it was kind of based loosely on how on a Mac you may have your time machine and you kind of can navigate through and see time. The idea was as you interact with this, you'll see these previews of stories. If I choose to click on one of these, my content will go to that position, and then I could look at that specific piece of data. So we can still get the same information that we had in like a visual search where we've got a longer list, or in a search result off of the Digg website, but we can do it in a very compacted, small way. And very similar to how the stories were in the accelerator, if I choose to click on that, I'll drive directly in. So the top half of this navigation are the recently popular dug stories, and then the lower half of this is those stories that are most dug. So if I were to click on the Florida Panthers right now, the Florida Panther fans exposes herself on live TV. So that's the most popular dug story. Now, as I had said before, if a user did not have a Silverlight experience, that user would be presented with that same data. That data would just be presented without the need or the use of Silverlight. So I'll show you a little bit about what that looks like. Let me do this first. Let's talk a little bit about how we actually built it. So there's been a lot of talk last year at MIX and a lot of talk this year at MIX in regards to what we're referring to as the designer-developer workflow. Now, this is all in context of Silverlight, because I think when you're developing against Silverlight, the traditional development workflow is a little different than it is in maybe static HTML or in some of the other technologies. And what makes it a little different is the injection of a different role that we refer to as the integrator. There's an article on the Expression website right now that kind of talks about this designer-developer workflow. It's a great article. I encourage you to read it. But it refers to this individual as the integrator. And the reason I bring this up is because when you're building a Silverlight control, I think it's important to think of how you're going to go from design through development. But design through development actually involves a little bit more developer-designer as a person than in a traditional maybe static HTML site. And so we refer to that person as the integrator. And their responsibility is to take the design, to put it into the Silverlight construct. So maybe it's building the XAML, it's maybe applying some motion animation to thing, and integrating the custom controls that maybe a developer built, or integrating the consumption of content that the developer might be consuming from Digg's API. They're integrating that within the presentation layer. And there's various different ways in which you would organize or develop your Silverlight control to facilitate this type of a designer-developer workflow. One thing is using strong separation patterns. There's a lot of talk from the WPF community about different separation patterns that work great in Silverlight. One of them is the model view model pattern. That lends itself extremely well to an integrator, because the integrator can use things that exist in Silverlight like data binding and loosely referenced class data that allows them to interact, build their content, and build it in such a way that when we hook it up to the real services, that control or page is going to work with little additional interaction by the integrator. So the keys to success, I think, in that workflow is the separation pattern that I just referred to. But the other part of it is using things within Silverlight like data binding to improve the separation of textual content on a page and how that content is massaged or how that content is organized on the backside. The other things that I think are really important in this process is just not being scared of Silverlight or not being scared of using interactive technologies. If you read some of the initial MSD articles about web slices, there's some tone and context around avoiding interaction or interactive components within web slices. And I think that if done correctly and presented correctly with the right usability, you can achieve a much more improved user experience using rich technology than you may have by just using static content. In our example, we certainly believe that, and that was one of the reasons why we made a decision to go rich. So as I had told you to, if a user doesn't have Silverlight installed, they need an experience. So we wrote this in such a way that to the non-Silverlight user, they're going to be presented information. Now, we intentionally wrote that to be a small set of data. We didn't want scroll bars. We didn't want to present a lot of data. But we also wanted to encourage them to install Silverlight. So we only present a handful of stories. They're just the most popular from Digg. But we encourage them with some call out to install Silverlight. Once they install Silverlight, then that's when they're going to experience a more rich experience. Now, certainly, it's pretty basic content, so it's not crazy in its richness. But I think the integration of a very custom navigation or scroll mechanism allows us to present all that additional data in a more visually and interactively appealing way. So as I had said before, we've got some custom controls that we built. So we built a custom slider or scroll bar that is a component or a user control that we could then leverage within the web slice. We also did a flyout or kind of a tooltip approach. We wanted users to not have to click to be able to see what stories existed. We wanted to minimize the number of clicks that might be necessary to preview content. The way in which we did that was to do these tooltips that allow you to quickly see if a story is of interest. When I click on that story title, we zoom or we navigate up to that specific story and show you that content. The third part that we needed to build was kind of our own custom list box. All of this is done with components that exist within the Silverlight framework. So, we're not leveraging anything third-party to be able to achieve any of that. It's simply data-bound user controls, and those controls then are getting populated from content that we consumed on the server. So in a web slice, we had showed you kind of a web slice before that was tied more around just consuming normal content. Well, when you're doing a web slice that is more rich in nature, one of the things you have to do is you have to provide it an external data source. So in this example, I'm going to create a piece of HTML that's going to get embedded on the Digg website. It may surround some content. And it's going to define a few elements in here that have relevance to how that data is going to be presented. The first is the title. As I said before, that's how it gets presented in the web slice. The second is where's that content coming from. Very easily within an entry content node, I could have provided some content. If I were to have done that, that content would have actually been what data the web slice would have consumed. In this example, I want to hit a PHP page to display some content. So I'm going to go to slicesdisplay.php, and that's going to return some data. The third is I'm going to bookmark. By creating an attribute with the value of bookmark, I'm telling the web slice that I'm going to direct links and the execution of the web slice to the Digg server. So if a user just opens the web slice and clicks on it, they'll automatically go to the Digg server. The last is I'm going to tell this data that it becomes stale. I'm going to tell IE that this data gets stale in approximately 15 minutes. So we chose 15 minutes to stay current with how Digg chooses to cache and how we may have done any caching on our side. With the use of Silverlight, you also have some interesting opportunities to leverage isolated storage locally to do some caching yourself if necessary. So how to get started? So, now with these tools available, what are some of the things that I should use in my decision process of deciding, do I want to create web slices? Do I want to create accelerators? And what are the things that I should be at least keeping in the back of my mind during that development process? And I think the first thing is you want to make sure you're targeting the right type of content on your site. A web slice, to me, has most relevance if it's frequently changing content. I don't believe it has as much relevance if it's content that's on your site. It's going to be on there forever, and it doesn't have a whole lot of frequency to it. Now, that said, I'm going to show you an example where I think from a marketing perspective, we can target a web slice to show featured items, items that we may change daily or weekly, but things that we want to really get to our community and show them. We may choose to look at something that's a little less frequent, but I think in general, a fair rule is to say that you want content that changes pretty frequently. The other thing is avoiding large collections of data. As you saw in the original Digg web slice, there's quite a bit of stories that are presented, and I think it's a little too much content. One of the values of a web slice is that it's not obtrusive. It's right there, it's available to you every day, but I don't want it to represent an entire page. If I wanted it to look like an entire page, then I'd go to that page. I want it to be a small snapshot. And that's why I suggest trying to keep it somewhere around 320 pixels. I think that's just a fair rule. But I think if done nicely, you could certainly go wider with that window. I would just be very careful on providing data that requires scrolling or navigation beyond. You certainly don't want to hide data from your user if not necessary. The fourth one is just considering how your community interacts with data. If you look at Digg, users like to look at what's most dug on that website. So it was extremely important to make sure that we were targeting the right piece of content. We wanted to target the top stories. We wanted to target what users traditionally or typically look at. So looking at analytics around your site and looking at how content is normally done is pretty important. And then lastly, cache the living out of your content. A web slice and an accelerator and a visual search is only going to be valuable to a user if it's fast and efficient. Definitely make sure that you've done the best architecture you can, use the best caching that you can, and that you present the data as fast as possible. So a couple things I want to talk about that I've seen in the community in regards to adoption, and some of them I'm going to refer to as myths. But there's things already built into IE that help to make these myths irrelevant. The first is that I think there's a perception to a lot of people that I actually have to go to IE and look in a gallery to be able to find how these things exist. And that's really not true. I can very easily create custom landing pages. In this example of eBay is looking at what browser came. It knows it's IE8, and it gives you an opportunity to add these immediately. If you're going to go through the time to create a web slice and an accelerator, let's make sure our users can find it. So one approach is to do just this. It's to show a call to action or a call out that suggests what the add. The second is to allow the user to hover over pieces of content. So as I had said before, when you add that HTML is a div tag. The div tag has a class name on it. That class name is called hslice. That class name doesn't have to be defined within your style sheet, but what it tells IE is that this is special content. And what's special about it is going to allow me to add directly from the web page my web slice or potentially an accelerator or something like that directly to IE8. So on the Digg website, if I were to hover over the top 24 stories, you would see it show up with a little green box and a little green icon. If I were to click on that, it would allow me to add that web slice directly. A second thing that happens that I don't believe a lot of users know is I don't have to just wander my mouse around the page. If you were to look at the very top toolbar next to where the tabs are, you'll notice a green icon. It's a little hard to see on here, but a little green icon. That little green icon will show up if any hslices exist on that page. If I had 10 hslices that existed on a page, I could click on that, and it would show me a list of all of those hslices or all of those web slices, and I could add them directly from that little menu. And that's kind of what it looks like if you zoom in a little bit. Now, for visual search, you can embed a hidden link within the page, and the hidden link then will be found the same type of way. It'll be discovered on the page, and that will indicate to users that my content has the capability of embedding this visual search component into IE8 or putting it into IE8 search. And I define that using this simple link structure. Define some information, point it to where my manifest is, and then that manifest then provides all the necessary information. The second is just this idea of, I think people think the web slice has to be small. And as I said, you can certainly make it bigger. But I think how you choose to display that content has the most to do with making your content valuable. So by saying, okay, well, the web slice is so little, can I actually provide relevant data? I believe you can. And the way you can do that is by being really smart about how you do your design. Creating a custom scroll bar, or maybe creating different views on the content. The last myth is just that it's hard to build. Like I said, in less than 2 weeks, you can build a web slice. In fact, I'm going to show you a case study now of a client that we built a web slice for in approximately a day and a half, a very rich interactive web slice. So it doesn't have to take a lot of effort. And I think the idea of consuming content, a lot of us already have services available to us. So let's choose to use those services and minimize the amount of effort we have to build for building these applications. The other one is that the accelerator. I showed you one with the display preview, but maybe for your type of need, you don't need a display preview. Maybe you simply want to select text or select specific links on a page and go to your website or to your accelerator, go to your accelerator's destination and provide all of the rich content in that site. That's certainly an option for you, and it doesn't have to do a display. So how does this apply to other clients? We have a client of ours which is it's a both a e-commerce website and a traditional kind of brick and mortar store. The client is called Hat Club. Hat Club is a series of stores that exist kind of in the Southwest, and they are, just as the name suggests, they sell hats. So they sell tons of varieties of baseball hats in tons of different formats. So you have fashion-based hats, you have sports hats, team-based stuff, you've got tons of different data. So we've been involved with this client from, for quite some time now, from the strategic side of who they are as a business and how they as a community, or more importantly, how they as a site can differentiate themselves from any of their competitors. So this website is, I think, a very visually appealing site, but it's very strategically targeted at who their community is. So we know a little bit about who their user is. We know that they as a business, they want to be a trendsetter. They want to show content to their users that they aren't going to find other places. They like to be the first to sell certain hats. Surprisingly, there's massive community around buying of hats. Users like to collect them. They like to have ones that are very hard to find. And so all of these things allow this client to kind of elevate themselves against their competitors. So we wanted to think, okay, well, does it make sense to use something like a web slice for this specific client? So what we did was we started to look at them strategically. So we wanted to look analytically at what do we know about how users interact with the Hat Club. So we jumped in analytics and we started to do some research. And one of the things that we found that was really interesting was that 35% of the page views on that site are coming from search. And so it's looking for a specific product. And that has a lot of relevance. You know, if we were to target certain ways of presenting the content, we know that users are looking for something. So we know that users are trying to find something specific, so maybe we can leverage that in how we present the data. The other thing that we found out was that after they're searching, they actually look at more pages and spend more time on the site. That's really, really important. So I think one of the things that we realized was that after they had done a search, they went to about 5.5 more pages, and they spent about 3 more minutes on the site once they completed a search. That's really, really important to know at targeting how we're going to interact with that user. The other thing is that the average time on the site is about 6 minutes. So we know that users are actually interacting with it. The last thing that I think is really important is we know that users use IE. We know that more than half of all of the people that purchase product on that site are coming from IE users. So it makes perfect sense then to use features that exist in IE and give them to our users. So the bottom line is that we want to enhance the experience for that client. So I'm going to show you a demo real quick. One thing to note, this is all written in 3 in beta. So we've used features that exist in the beta version that was released yesterday. And I think you'll see that these features are not in there just simply to leverage new features, but I think they do enhance and improve the user experience. So let's go to the website. So if I go to the Hat Club website, I'm obviously navigating to this website in IE. As you can note, I've got a little menu bar up here at the top. This is what I was just talking about. This tells me that somewhere on this page we've embedded a web slice. So if I were to click on that, it would show you the list of all the web slices that have been embedded in here. I also could navigate around and, a piece of content has been tagged. So another way the user might find it is by navigating over something. If I were to click on that, I would get prompted. That would allow me to add that web slice. I can define the name. I can define specific information about it. I've already added it, so I won't add it again. Once I've added that content, I can display that. Now, using all those analytics and that information we got, we made a decision of what we wanted our web slice to be. We wanted our web slice to target a featured product. So the idea was we know that users like to see something that's new. We know that the community around that says, well, I want to know what's the latest cool hat. I want to know, what is something that they may have got and that is hard to find. So we wanted to present that in a way that we enhance the experience. So one of the things that we had available to us, let's see if I can get this to work. Hold on. So we had some great content. So we had the ability that we had 360 views of all of their hats. So we took the advantage of using Silverlight to be able to present that content. The other thing that we had was we had very high resolution content. We know that another way our users interact with content is they want to see the details of the hat. So what we wanted to do was provide them the ability to look at the content. So what we did was we took another Silverlight piece of functionality, Deep Zoom, and we incorporated it within our custom 360 viewer. So users want to see, Hat Club users want to see that detail. So I can navigate in, I can move around, and I can interact with my hat in a very fun and unique way. The other thing that we know that they want is they want to look at the details of that hat. They want to know how much it costs. They want to know what the price is. They may even want to know additional information in the future, like inventory or stock. So we wanted to present that in a pretty simple and intuitive way, but in a way that encourages that user to now go to this website. So any piece of information that I have on here, I could link into specific components in the site. So for example, if I wanted to present an add to cart button here, I could easily present an add to cart button, click on that button, and actually transport them directly into our buying process and checkout process. The other thing that we do very frequently with Hat Club is we like to run promotions to encourage users to buy products and to interact. So we wanted to show them what the current promotion was. So we wrote some code that actually displays something that we think that user might be interested in knowing about or seeing about, but now we've done it in a way that we can change it relatively frequently, and we can do it in such a way that they are going to be looking at this content at a higher frequency than maybe going to the website. So, if, let's say weekly, we update that content, we can show them directly on their toolbar the content is different, and now instead of maybe looking at it or getting it in an email or hoping that they navigate to that site, we can actually present that content to them. So I think the promo is a pretty cool feature. Just for a little side note, in Silverlight 3, this ability to do this 3D flip is one of the new features they may have talked about. It's the 2D, 3D perspective rotations. That's a great feature that I think you're going to see a lot more in Silverlight 3, this ability to apply some perspective. In here, I think what it does is it allows us to present more content in a smaller space without distracting from the usability. You'll notice there's not a whole lot of hover effects. By hovering over things start moving. I think you have to be very cautious when you design these things, knowing that it is kind of a modal window that's been popped up. You don't want that interaction to be directed for the user. You want that user to direct it for themselves. So all of these actions are such that they can do it themselves. So just for a little background on how the control is built, like I said, from design through integration into Silverlight was about 4 hours of effort. I think that speaks to the tools now that are available for Silverlight and how much speed can be gained now in integrating great design into the Silverlight code. It's also constructed with an understanding that we're consuming content. So behind the scenes, our Hat Club site has services, and those services return data. And so all we did was consume a service using Silverlight. That service is consumed. The service was built using link to SQL. So we pull out of our data structure, we massage that data, and then Silverlight consumes that service. That consumption then is done using a model view model pattern, and then using binding, we simply bind our content directly to our data source. So very, very little effort for our integrator to have to get content in there, but very, very efficient development designer workflow. So that's all I got. Couple things that I was asked to kind of let everybody know about. If you haven't had an experience or an opportunity to go up to the Internet Explorer 8 Compatibility Lab, I encourage you to do that. There's a whole bunch of people up there. a good portion of the engineering team from IE8's up there. So I encourage you to go up there, talk about these technologies, but also you can look at your sites and your content. The other thing that hasn't been at least discussed or it wasn't talked about in the keynote was there is a MIX DVD that you can pick up at the registration desk, and it does contain the IE8 bits. So if you want to try out IE8, I would encourage you to go grab that DV. Saves you from having to download it from the internet. So that's all I got. If you're interested in learning more about TerraLever, I encourage you to come to our website. If you want to hear more about the things that I care about in the community of Silverlight, feel free to come to my blog and my website. I certainly spend a lot of time talking about how to leverage that technology just in general and outside of the context of maybe web slices and accelerators. But I talk about it in the context of Silverlight and the value that Rich Interactive now has in the Microsoft community. I'm a huge fan of Silverlight if you can't figure that out. And I think it's a really emerging technology, and I think it has tremendous power that we can leverage for our clients and certainly in interactive marketing. So thanks.